Hi and welcome. We are really excited to have you join us today as we continue this journey. That's the Healthcare Masterclass series. This is a three-part series. We had our first session where we looked at the opportunities and challenges of incorporating digital technologies into healthcare. And today we're going to look at building trust in that personal health information that you now may be responsible for. And before we jump into this masterclass, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Next slide, please. As you're aware, everyone has joined. You're on mute and your cameras are off. That'll help us ensure we have a good network connection for the panelists when they're speaking. We do want you to engage. We're really excited to have you ask questions. If you could please submit those questions into the question box, text box, I believe should be on your kind of bottom right, and we'll funnel those to the panelists during the Q&A session. So again, anything that comes to mind, please do ask. We really want this to be interactive. We're also going to run a poll, and again, really looking forward to having you participate in that poll and to help kind of set up where you're at in this journey. Of course, the webinar will be recorded as well, and then that will be made available post-event and will remain available in our library. Next slide, please. And so just to cover our agenda, we're going to have a brief overview of the summary from previous webinar, and then we'll look at the objectives for this webinar. We have an esteemed set of panelists with us today, very excited, and we're going to be looking at privacy and security for patient health information from three different vantage points. We'll be looking at the technology perspective and what it means from that background, a legal perspective, and then also a people perspective. And again, after we have those engagements, we'll open up for Q&A to the audience. And then we'll wrap this up with some key takeaways, and then we'll talk about next steps. As I said, this is a three-part series, and so we have one more class to come. Next slide. And so in our previous webinar class, we did cover some data that indicated just how valuable patient health information is, and therefore its increased risk and subject to cybercrime. From there, we were able to highlight and speak with clinicians and look at how digitization has been changing healthcare for the clinicians and the patients. And we talked about how healthcare really is fundamentally an information and knowledge-based function. And digital technology has enabled better access and improved sharing of that information, especially during the pandemic. And the result of that has already been improved patient outcomes for patients with chronic conditions, an improvement in clinician working environment, and just overall an improvement in the ability of healthcare to impact patients' lives. However, there are still some trust issues, and we did talk about those as well. Clinicians still have an overwhelming feeling that technology happens to them as opposed to being a partner and engaging in that technology as part of the service to help enable those outcomes. They're very concerned. They clinicians realize that that patient relationship is built on trust, and that trust is necessary for patients to share that critical information. And the current systems and tools have to enable that trust. And so that has to be thought about as we're innovating in new health technologies. Next is the use of that patient health information. We still see clinicians verifying information that is coming to them from electronic records and taking that extra step. So they're not realizing some of those time savings that we had intended through digitization. And then we still have patients' perception of what's happening with my data, where it's going, and how that's being used. And then there's also just overall the ecosystem's concern with accuracy. What are the thresholds for the quality of the data, and how do we ensure that accuracy as it's moving about the ecosystem? And so the key takeaway was that collaboration is really necessary between the stakeholders from the outset. And then when we're looking at design, we're looking at human factors, we're looking at usability, and we're looking at governance and oversight throughout that life cycle and building in privacy and security and trust by design. So from there, we're now going to look at how do we start addressing that trust, and what does what does it mean to have that patient health data, and how do we go about building trust, and what does trust look like from the technology, legal, and people perspective? So with that, we'll be, we have, again, an amazing set of attendees here with as our panelists. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So joining us today, we have Jerry Andretti, and he serves as CEO of Hatch, which is a healthcare technology company that specializes in system coordination and system optimization. His career spans a variety of engineering, architecture, and operation roles for prestigious companies, including Deloitte Consulting, Bank of America, and HCA. However, most recently, he served at senior leadership roles at multiple Nashville-based startups, including Qualifax, Shareable Inc., and Metalogics, which he co-founded as the CTO. Next, we have Odia Kagan, who's joined us, and she's partner and chair of GDPR compliance and international privacy practice at Fox Rothschild. Odia has advised more than 200 companies across industries on compliance with data-related regulation, including AI and biometrics, GDPR, California Consumer Privacy Act, and other US data protection laws. Odia provides counsel on compliant design and implementation of products and services. She holds 3 law degrees, 5 bar admissions, and 7 privacy certifications. Next is Misty Blakesley, Chief People Officer. Misty is a strategic, people-centric, and transformational coach and executive, leveraging her extensive experience to drive peak performance in companies and people. She joins us today to share her experience with an extreme ransomware attack while serving as the VP of Sales, Account Management, and Implementation at Apex HCM Technologies. As a leader, she worked tirelessly to help the organization recover by focusing on retaining clients, rebuilding the new sales pipeline, and rebuilding a sales team that unfortunately suffered 100% turnover. From BSI, we have myself and Christy Gaskell, and I am part of the innovations team looking to build solutions that help with problems regarding resilience and trust across industries and organizations. We are also joined by David Mudd, our global head for digital trust assurance. Dave is responsible for digital trust assurance solutions, including cybersecurity, privacy, IT governance and risk, supply chain, data management, and AI. We're also joined by Connor Hogan, who's our Global Practice Director for Data Governance. Connor's team advises on complex operational and strategic privacy challenges and supports clients to embed privacy and data protection into the fabric of their operations in a proactive and pragmatic manner. Again, really excited to have these panelists join us. I think it's going to be a very engaging and interesting conversation, and I'm really glad that we have so many participants today. And again, please do leverage that Q&A box and submit your questions, and we'll be able to address those as we move forward. So now we're going to go into a poll, and I'll hand that over to David.
Thank you, Christy. Hello, everybody. Unfortunately, the poll seemed to have just clipped some of the words off here, but the key point here is at the end of the last session, we talked about the importance of understanding data flows and processes. And as we'll come on to today, this is absolutely critical in building trust. So we just want to really, whatever stakeholder group you belong to, whether you're a user, a specifier, a consultant, an implementer, or a technology provider, you'll have a particular data process around healthcare and PHI in mind. So regarding that process, what is your personal feeling and confidence about how well that data flow and process, including anything involving pseudonymized data, is actually mapped? Low, you've got a process for it, but not necessarily mapping the whole end-to-end flow. Medium, you know your fundamental flow, but not necessarily ensure that absolutely everything is covered. High, yes, we're confident we've actually mapped all the data across the network. Or very high, we've accurately mapped all the data across our network and had it independently verified, or you're not sure. Again, it's really, really important that you all give your personal opinions on this, because it will actually help us shape some of the narrative going forward to ensure we really cater for our audience here. So if you could all let us know your personal feelings around the particular healthcare data process that you're interested in or involved in, that would be really useful. And also, please remember, keep the questions coming in the chat as well. And we'll try to make sure we've got time to address them during what is going to be, I think, a really insightful next hour or so as we speak to our panelists. So we've got some of you still to vote. Come on, we're not going to tell anybody. Just be open with us. Okay, here's where we are at now. Okay, that's interesting. So slightly different from this morning's session, where we had more that were probably at the high, the medium and high stage here. There's quite a few that aren't unsure, and quite a few really at the medium side of things. So understanding that's not a problem. I mean, this is what we're here to help you with. So thanks for sharing that. That really helped us with the narrative here. So we're going to move on really to the panel session now. And for the first of the three lenses here, we're going to be looking at it from the technology lens. So building what we discussed last time, we really want now to bring to life what good practice looks like potentially elsewhere that the healthcare sector can learn from. So I want to introduce Jerry, if you wouldn't mind joining me in the chat room here. And before we dive straight into the detail here, Jerry, perhaps we could spend a few minutes, if you wouldn't mind, just sharing a bit of your background, where you come from, and how you got into the healthcare sector, because that will really help frame, I think, the future part of the discussion here. And like I said, in particular, the opportunity the healthcare sector has for learning lessons. So over to you for a bit of a short life story, if you don't mind.
Sure. Thanks for having me, David. Very excited to be here. Again, to the audience, my name is Jerry Andrade. I serve as CEO of a company called Hatch, but I started my career back in '99 around the tech boom timeframe, and grew in through the technical ranks. So started as a software engineer, working with financial systems, large banks, UBS in Switzerland, Bank of America here in the States, and spent the first several years doing architecture and financial solutions there. Then transitioned to healthcare as I wanted to make a switch from being a technologist in terms of engineering and architecture to more product design and product management. So started working with large healthcare companies, Medco Health and HCA here in Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm based, and kind of understanding of the gap between where financial systems were in terms of digital solutions and security, and where healthcare was. Saw a lot of opportunity there. So gradually started working with smaller startups who are more innovative and progressive in terms of taking advantage of technology, and grew my career from there. Not quite as active in the engineering side of things now, but I still consider myself a technologist. So excited to be sharing thoughts here with you, David, and the audience.
Thanks, Jerry. So yes, you've got an eye for the bigger picture here, but your heart, a bit like mine, you're still there with the ones and zeros and the technology. I'd love to keep your hand in. I know the feeling as a electronics engineer, software engineer myself. Sometimes it's a case of little knowledge is dangerous. You kind of think you know it all, but technology moves on, but it's good to keep your hand in. So having come from the fintech sector and now spent quite a bit of time in the healthcare sector, how do you see the sector is doing when it comes to digital transformation, especially around things like cybersecurity and privacy, compared to, say, fintech?
I'd say we're doing good and trending upwards, right? I think historically healthcare has always been a laggard in terms of adopting technology, and Christy spoke a little bit about this as well. It's not necessarily been centric to the industry; it's more been pushed, and so there's been resistance there. Whereas from a fintech perspective, the consumer's always been more centric around the experience. From a banking perspective, there was lots more competition. When we think about how we see our doctors and our healthcare providers, in most cases, we revolve our attention around their schedules, right? We go and wait in waiting rooms, et cetera. In the financial world,
I presume, Jerry, actually that reticence to bring technology in is actually a good thing. It's not necessarily a criticism there. I assume that lagging, it's like back to the first do no harm principle.
That's a great point, right? It's partially by design, right? The data that we're carrying on the healthcare side is of critical importance, and as the financial world picked and drove more consumers in terms of security, and people became more comfortable with things like multi-factor authentication. Now I think healthcare is realizing the importance of these types of security measures and becoming more comfortable with cloud computing and taking steps to be more up to speed and up to date. But your point's very valid, David. It really has to do with the amount of concern that healthcare has around the data itself.
And I presume with that kind of pushback, the other factor, well, that I've seen over recent years has been, the large number of breaches and issues that have happened when you've got very busy, overworked clinicians having to deal quite often with IT, manage IT issues that may be outside of their full understanding and control, and suddenly they're in all kinds of trouble. That must create even more of a tension there when it comes to, as Christy was saying, I presume that technology being pushed on them. Is that something that you've seen and experienced? And I'd like to think that's changing, but you can see why it's there with the raft of breaches that still continues to a certain extent.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the nature of breaches and ransomware and security events continues to rise, right? I think it's near doubled over the last several years, and it will likely continue to do so as there's more innovation there. But as you mentioned, from the provider perspective, the delivery of clinical care has traditionally been decades ago something that didn't involve a lot of technology. So it's difficult to sort of incorporate things like electronic medical records into the process and not have providers feel as that's disruption in the process. So as technologists, we've struggled with that, where it's sort of a natural distraction sometimes for providers in healthcare. But I think as more consumers and patients see the benefits, as we saw through the pandemic, there's definitely been benefits to the ability to connect digitally with providers. We've seen an uptick in provider response as well. I've spoken to my team about how healthcare sometimes moves in seismic shifts, right? Sometimes out of necessity, like you said, David. We tend to be very careful. We are, of course, dealing with the currency of people's lives. So a simple technical error, a misplaced trust in terms of a technical solution could have drastic consequences in terms of the patient's life.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point actually around the seismic shift and what we saw with the pandemic. And I presume this is all around balancing risks and benefit. Suddenly there's all kinds of other problems there. From the doing no harm and balance stakes, it was better to bring the technology in to allow solutions to help a bigger problem. That had that bigger problem not been there, then the balance wouldn't have been right. So again, I think terrible as the pandemic was, it's kind of almost like forced some of this change to come through. And now is really, I presume, the opportunity to kind of take stock almost from that and learn how to move forward.
Yeah, I think we learned a lot of things as a community through the pandemic all across the world, but from healthcare specifically, obviously there was a rush to telemedicine, and the company that I work for, Hatch, was originally a telemedicine company. And what you saw was this tremendous spike in utilization of tools, digital solutions to connect. And just as interesting as that spike, I think we discussed in prep for this, David, as it receded back to the norm and people were able to go in, the use of telemedicine, though it came down significantly, was still 30 times higher as it plateaued than it was previously. So like you said, it drove us as patients and the providers into this understanding that these digital tools can be helpful. And it also drove the industry to make sure that the security around that was there.
Okay, so if we're going to summarize then, healthcare sector naturally and rightly going to lag to a certain extent. And if you're grading, you're basically, you've got a kind of a could do better, doing okay, but could do better. And then what we've got is a natural reluctance and resistance across the clinician community, but a potential understanding through the pandemic, and now a willingness to engage. And I suppose this is where that lagging can actually be an opportunity. You know, the opportunity to learn really from other industries such as the fintech sector, and maybe take some of the steps and learn from the pain they've gone through there. So bearing that in mind, and learning maybe from your experience with the fintech sector, what would you say would be the critical factors for success in a digital transformation project environment?
Yeah, for healthcare specifically, I think one of the key aspects is to definitely focus on the patient, right? We as an industry are trending towards being more patient-centric, where previously the system itself has been provider-centric. So from a digital transformation perspective, making sure that the patient is trusting in terms of their data security, doing everything you can to enact policies and procedures and safeguards to make sure that there's that there's minimal risk, I should say. It's difficult to make it no risk, but minimal risk of any sort of compromise in that regard. That's key, because building that patient-provider trust and securing the data appropriately only opens doors for the patient to be more comfortable with digital solutions, which then takes us further down the road of transformation. So I think that's number one. Secondarily, I'd just say it's important for us to look at security and technology in a constant state of evaluation, right? We need to, I think all too often I see technology companies looking at it in terms of an annual or a quarterly checkup, whether they've got a certification or they are doing some annual penetration testing or an external or internal risk assessment. This is obvious. This is, you know, essentially a red herring in terms of feeling compliant with security. Threats evolve and change and mature on a much more frequent basis. So those are the two things that I turn attention to drive further transformation.
Yeah, particularly that second one. I mean, the patient-centric thing, I think we can all see that's really, really important. But we've really emphasized over this, I think, the importance for security by design, privacy by design. But what you're saying here as well is, and we mustn't ignore that, is this is an iterative process that won't end. So it's not like, okay, we've got that sorted, we've got our risk assessment done, we've got privacy and security up to here, we're good now, we can put our feet up and relax. You know, this is a very, very dynamic environment, and it has to remain a top priority going forward. So if we're then looking at if you're going to engage with somebody for this new technology, you know, it's all very well to say, okay, we're going to have security by design, and here's our wonderful technology, this kind of thing. That's great. If you are there as a care provider, you want this technology on board, it's very, very difficult to say what's going to work for me. Is this the right product? Is this the right organization to be working with? So besides the general considerations around patient centricity and getting the design right up front, who are the kind of organizations that and what are the kind of products really that the key providers should be looking to partner with to really make this a success?
Yeah, from a regulatory perspective, I mean, the certifications out there are numerous, right? In the U.S., from a HIPAA perspective, obviously that governs the security and privacy of patient health or protected health information. I would say number one is to work with an organization that can speak to their efficacy regarding those types of regulations. Certifications are nice, right? It's great to talk with someone who has in the US, a high trust certification or an organization like that. But I also always caution providers, healthcare systems, to look behind the certifications and make sure that the correct processes are in place. So I always advise to ask about what policies and procedures are in place at your partners or your vendors for a breach event. What is notification timelines like? What are they doing to make sure that they're continuously improving in that regard, and how do they address security overall? Do they have someone on site? Do they use a third party that is an outsourced provider? How often do they audit their systems? Those types of questions I think are important in healthcare to ask, because all too often, because of the poor user interfaces and some of what Christy spoke to in terms of design challenges that have been imposed on healthcare, the providers just gravitate towards how will this fit in my workflow and don't often think about security in the first place.
And I think you've hit on a really, really important part here, and that is the supply chain in the digital context. No provider of technology owns everything that's going on in their system. They are very, very heavily dependent on technologies providers behind that. It may be hardware, it may be software systems, but they are not going to be owning everything. And vulnerability disclosure and response in the case of an event are absolutely critical. So, I mean, in my view, you're absolutely spot on there, and you don't need to be necessarily a technical expert to be probing questions around how your supplier manages its own supply chain. And that, I would say, is where the biggest risk is. And just a general point for the audience here, the story used to be around cybersecurity and protecting your data is, if you've got valuable data, you can do all you can to protect it. The bad guys will then go through your weakest link, which will be the supply chain. Now we're seeing that fundamentally change with the advent of industrialized cybercrime and ransomware. Now, if you can find the right supplier and hit them with a denial of service or ransomware attack, you don't just hit one company, you hit 100, you hit 1,000. The blast radius from attack is much, much bigger. So therefore, when you're looking at risks to your data, your supply chain is now proactively a big target for cybercrime. And so I think, Jerry, that point there you made, I can't agree with that strongly enough. That's a really, really critical point. So we're talking really about individual organizations here, how they might need to work to engage. Just a final point on this section. What do you see, from a technology perspective, a challenge back to us and challenge back to the industry on what we need to do and sort out to really drive the spectacular disruptive innovation, the potential that we see that this kind of enormous amounts of data and AI can bring. If you're looking at the future wider steps that the broader industry needs to do as a final point, I'd love to hear your views on that.
Yeah, I think from an individual level, everyone in the industry can do, and kudos to everyone on the audience here. It's education, right? Taking part in webinars like this, keeping yourself up to speed, carving out time to becoming more educated on what's happening in technology, in security, in industry. It's very important, right? We're all very busy. But taking time aside, both in your organization, to do this is really important. Looking ahead from a larger view across the industry, I think the interesting question that's going to need to be answered over the next months and years is around the access to data and how we can walk this fine line of utilizing this incredible potential that we have within data. I spoke a little bit about how we in our company are looking to harness the audio and video components of a telemedicine session to do more clinical analysis. But there's still, you won't need to be respectful of the fact that this data belongs to someone and needs to be anonymized or de-identified for the use of this type of research purpose. So we do have a question as an industry in front of us on how we can walk that fine line between utilizing data for the greater good while still being respectful and protecting the privacy of individuals who are providing us that data, sometimes unbeknownst to the fact that it could be used in that manner.
I think that's a great point. Without trusted, reliable data, AI, the metaverse, digital twins will be dead. They're never going to get anywhere. And it's interesting, I'm actually sat here in a side room to a conference center in Birmingham in the UK, just at a digital healthcare and smart hospitals event here. And this particular issue was one of the prime things that came up today. We had somebody talking about some fantastic new technology, basically just using a smartphone that can look at gestures and things like that and make all kinds of potential data points really, really useful. But that doesn't fit into the standard pseudonymization process of you deleting someone's name. It's video, so how can we build trust around de-identification around that? So I think, that probably, Jerry, you've hit on what I think is one of the biggest challenges to the industry to really unlock that the next wave, the next seismic shift that we see coming in with the advent of artificial intelligence. So thank you very much for this. We're going to come back to you along with the other speakers after the Q&A session to get your final takeaways. But in the meantime, thank you so much. And I'm now going to hand over to Connor to take us on our next session. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks so much, David.
Thanks very much, David, and indeed, Jerry, some really interesting insights from my perspective, not least because of the mention of the challenges really that organizations face in this space today, and to hear Jerry talk about the supply chain and the fact that the data represents people. I think that speaks very much to sort of my MO as a privacy professional. However, that said, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by a fantastic proponent of international law and privacy in Odia Kagan, and really want to welcome Odia to the session this afternoon, my time, this morning, your time. Good morning, Odia, and welcome.
Good morning.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, and from a personal perspective, really looking forward to our conversation. But just for the benefit of maybe the audience, just maybe to give a sense of the nature of the work that you've done in the general sort of healthcare and health sector. You just give us maybe a 1 minute quick, as David said, life story of your exposure to all things health and PHI related.
So I work a lot. My practice focus is privacy compliance. And so I do touch on all of the new privacy laws in the US as well as GDPR. And those are, you know, the traditional kind of, it's funny that we say traditional now, but like CPRA and, you know, Connecticut, Colorado, but also Washington, My Health, My Data, the FTC, you know, health rule and FTC recent guidance on it. I sort of triage HIPAA with, and then work on HIPAA in conjunction with our HIPAA specialists at the firm. And so basically, I get to assist clients with health-related questions when we have clients that have health tech type ventures, like applications or services that are health but not HIPAA. And then we have clients that have both, you know, health and HIPAA, then they're regulated both by the laws and the FTC as well as HIPAA, and obviously, you know, straight up PHI. And it's the interplay, as we're gonna, I think, discuss, the sort of increasingly complex interplay between these different regimes is actually what's making things more challenging and interesting and complex for both for us and for the companies actually dealing with it.
Absolutely, and I think if anybody was to look at the raft of regulations and compliance requirements that organizations in the health sector have to adhere to, and one might be forgiven if you thought, well, actually, they're the types of organizations that would do this very well because there's so much sensitive data in that sector in the first place. But actually, all of the regulations that have happened over the last number of years, and those new and evolving ones that we see both in the US, here in Europe, and further afield, in fact, not least in terms of AI, it's definitely an interesting time to be in privacy and an interesting time to be supporting organizations through those compliance journeys. But from your perspective as an external advisor to organizations that are dealing with, yes, the challenges, but also the opportunities, what are the sort of the big areas of focus in the security and privacy compliance arenas that you see your clients and many organizations in the health sector facing today?
So I think that when we say this, right, the interesting times thing, I think that we forget that originally this is like not a good thing to say to people, right, when you live in interesting times. And so it so happens that we do live in interesting times in this context. And so, but part of the reason is I think that fundamentally, I think that one of the challenges here is that this is, you know, there was the old commercial, like Oldsmobile commercial in the US, right? It's not your father's Oldsmobile, it's not your father's health data, right? The concept of health data is changing dramatically, has changed, is changing dramatically. And I think the key challenge that we are facing with clients is, what do you mean this is health data? It's kind of like, you know, sort of a reincarnation of the conversation that we had with clients. Maybe you guys had less of this because, you know, it's been around since 1995 in Europe, but in the US, like first iteration of what do you mean email is personal information, right? Like first iteration was 2018 when GDPR, what do you mean? I had a client that collected like mobile IDs, like IDFAs and things. And it's like, what do you mean this is personal data subject to GDPR? Like, oh no, right? And so that was like step one. Step two is now with CPRA and CCPA and the state laws, like, who cares about email? Who cares about cookies, right? And now it's like, this is all personal information. So now this is like the sort of Gen X of the you know, definition of PII, right? Like the Neanderthal, like from PII to like personal information to now like, you know, this is also health information. So now these pixels, a lot of you may have seen, right, this wave of litigation and enforcement and joint communication between the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, that's the privacy enforcer and the regulator in the US, as well as the OCR, which enforces HIPAA. They had a joint notification talking about pixels, right? So like a pixel in a website is health information. And this isn't just a pixel in, and there was a case like this, where the pixel and the tracking was placed behind the login of your electronic health record, right? So that's, you know, clearly PHI. The fact that this was shared was also deemed to be a, you know, HIPAA breach, right? Because this is like straight up, you know, PHI. But then what about before the login? You are just a person who is expressing an interest in a website that may have something to do with like wellness or, you know, health or mental health. So now we have decisions, right, in the US that expand the definition. So when we had the Norway Grinder case, and you know, the some of the arguments there were, but this doesn't have to mean sexual orientation. You could just be a curious, like heterosexual. And the Norwegian DPA was like, nah, that's still Article 9, right? And then the CJEU in the recent decision said, oh, you have a list of spouses and you can figure out the gender of the spouse, and therefore you can figure out the sexual preference. Okay, well, this is also Article 9, right? And so in the US, we know we don't have that yet, but we do have, you know, the FTC saying, you know, even if this is not like BetterHelp and GoodRx, right? The issue there was not the prescription information, was not the mental health counseling session. It was rather sharing pixels and trackers in the metadata, and the fact that you went on the website even before you registered and you created an account. And so I think that is a real challenge. The other is biometrics and the expanding like different biometrics laws. So I think one big challenge is like the landscape, right? The landscape has changed dramatically, and the stuff that's captured is a lot more. And then the second challenge is consent. So consent, this is another situation where, you know, Europeans are like, yeah, this is like a rerun, right? This is like a remake, like Full House. What is it, Fuller House, right? It's like the remake of consent, right? So you guys, you know, already have been grappling with consent for what, like, you know, 5 to 7 years since, like, you know, GDPR reinvented consent, and we got, you know, the working party guidance and then GDPR stuff, and, you know, people started dealing with it, and it's still an issue, right? Like, what can you do, and what's the reasonable alternative and all that stuff. So we're like, you know, we're like the reboot of that, which is, what do you mean? Freely given, right? The freely given thing, it's like, what do you mean? So I can like have somebody sign, so I can put it in my question one, so I can put it in my terms and conditions. No, that doesn't even work under the traditional laws like BIPA. You can't, the biometric law in Illinois, right? Like you can't bury it in the terms and conditions. Okay, so we've gone through after that. Oh, so I can have a click through that says, I accept that no, you can't do that because you can't condition the consent on a service. So I think this is really important now because of the new rights relating to sensitive information in the new laws. Washington, My Health, My Data, Colorado, Connecticut, Virginia, right? Opt-in consent to sensitive information. That's like a game changer. So I think those are kind of the two big challenges that I would say is, one, wow, like this is health. I didn't realize this was health data, and there are like a bazillion laws that apply. And number two is the consent. Like, okay, I didn't realize this is consent. So how do I actually do the things that I want to do? And then the question that usually never happened before in US law, it was always like, what type of pieces of paper do I need to throw at people so I can do it? And now it's like, well, maybe you just really can't do it at all. And so that's, all these are really kind of challenges that companies are facing, I think.
No, really, really interesting, Odia. And what really stands out to me there is the sort of the message that actually, as you digitize in health, you're becoming a technology organization, you're becoming a technology solutions provider, not just a healthcare provider or a healthcare organization or a clinician, and having an appreciation for what data you have, what data you're collecting, why you're doing so, and what underpins it from a compliance perspective. So to bring you back to that question, what do we need to throw at people so that we can do it? Well, actually, the question really organizations could be asking themselves is, should we be even considering whether we do this or not? Is this the right thing to do? And in that new world of them transitioning and going through transformation programs, becoming digitized, relying on digital supply chains and no longer just pens and paper, right? And clinician files that might be locked away in the cabinet at the end of the evening. It's an entirely new world. And with that, you've already alluded to, for instance, the significant swathe of regulations. With existing regulations, and indeed then the evolution of regulations as they maybe try and catch up with the relentless pace of technology change and innovation, how does a health organization that might be already juggling the difficulty of operations with innovation and digitization, how do they juggle the additional problem of perceived regulatory conflicts, for instance, as you mentioned earlier?
So I think that one thing that I want to pick up though on your question on should we consider it, I think yes, because I think the point is the considering is the issue here. So should we consider that? Yes, you should consider, as opposed to like, start and then like, back into the paperwork. The consider piece is the key, because the new laws in the US also kind of imported data minimization, purpose limitation, purpose specification, retention limitation, all that stuff. So all of these things, like really the question is like, do I need to do like why do I need this? Is this like a good idea? Can I demonstrate? I actually had a conversation with a client about something related to health information. And I said, well, look, the business is going to need to be able to demonstrate that they can't accomplish this purpose. Let's assume that it's a legitimate purpose. I mean, that was the case here. But like the first is, all right, is this a legitimate like purpose that I need to accomplish? But second is, like, is this the least invasive means for me to accomplish it? And because if you can come up in a casual conversation with like 2.5 other alternatives that are worth exploring that are less invasive, don't even go down that path, because why? You won't be able to demonstrate the right thing to the regulator. So I think that part, so actually sort of backing into your question the other way, is that first of all, it's important to remember that at least as with respect, maybe not HIPAA, but HIPAA is like a whole different ball game. It's kind of arguably not really a privacy law. It's kind of like a, tech insurance-y type law. But if you're talking about the other pieces, right, like the FTC's approach, the new privacy laws, the Washington My Health, My Data, GDPR, right? Like, first of all, one thing to note is that there are a lot of commonalities between them, especially when you are planning what to do. There are a lot of differences, and if you need to litigate them, I think the litigation might look different. But when you're planning and you're doing sort of a risk-based approach on what to do, I think that there are a lot of commonalities, and I mentioned the key ones, right? Like in all of the cases, you now need to think, should I be doing this? Could I be doing this
Right.
in a different way? Do I need this data? Like, do I need to share it? Do I need to sell it? Do I need, like, all of those things, right? The conflicts are, there are many though, because there are different approaches between GDPR and the US laws. The US laws themselves are not exactly aligned with each other, which is not helpful, right? There are tables out there, right? Charts comparing the 12.5 laws that we have in the US states. They can't even get sensitive information as a consensus, right? So there are different tweaks. Okay, like 85, 90% of sensitive information is common to all the states. By the way, US sensitive information / sensitive data is basically GDPR Article 9 plus a couple of other things, right? So it does overlap. But so one, that's not even the same. And so that's difficult. And then the approaches are not the same. California is kind of an opt-out, and then the other states are an opt-in. Some of them have a couple of exceptions. Some of them don't have exceptions. So it is very and they keep changing, right? But so that is really difficult to deal with, and that's why there are a lot of people in industry and not in industry saying, like, we need a federal law, guys, like, this is really difficult. But in you know, what's, I mean, you know, rather than leaving people with, you know, life sucks and like, let's, you know, retire in Aruba kind of situation, which then it wouldn't. But I think, first of all, to not be cynical, I think that there are very limited situations where there are conflicts between like the right thing to do and like getting, like, if you really want to get something something positive, like you have some sort of positive you know, initiative or something that you need to get done, right? Like we talked about, like clinical trials or, you know, experiments or like testing or whatever. There are very
something that represents betterment of society and that there's a purpose behind things.
Exactly, and science and innovation and things like that. There are, I'm not going to say there aren't, but there are the situations where privacy laws would hinder and prevent that are more limited than people think. Let's start with that. Number two, I think that the one thing, and maybe if you have specific thoughts, I'm happy to like speak to them, but the one issue that comes to my mind about this is like the cross-border transfer thing, right? Because that, that issue, right, was an issue. I know that there are, you know, places where companies stopped like health-based, you know, projects because, you know, God forbid they would be stored on AWS East, right? So that is, I would agree that that was, you know, very difficult and maybe still is. I think it helps that we now have the data privacy framework, the EU-US data privacy framework, where either you can deal with a certified entity or you can leverage your, you know, the fact that the, you know, European Commission already signed off on the kind of what I call the NSA ate my cookies part, right? The national security part, and say, okay, this is like, you know, the NSA's consumption of cookies has now become necessary and proportionate, and therefore, you know, you can use like, you know, the US based like plates, right? So I think that really helps. In other cases, I think that, you know, it's true that you really can't cut corners on like secondary uses of sensitive data, right? It's really an issue. It's become more of an issue with AI and generative AI and uses of automated decision making and automating, you know, research and big data in connection with health. And that's an issue. But the risks are also very high, and so I think that's a situation where, you know, it is a good idea that we have kind of privacy law guardrails around this, because the stakes are high with respect to your sensitive data and decisions being made about it.
No, absolutely. And I think what you said earlier about, the fact that organizations consider it is a really positive first step, because, being aware of maybe privacy laws limiting the options that people have to further process data, right, that might have been collected as part of a clinical trial or part of a very legitimate aim from a societal benefit perspective or innovation, and then realizing, oh no, there's a limit here. Actually challenging themselves on that is hugely important. But if you were to summarize, Odia, a couple of key messages for organizations that are navigating all of these complexities on a day-to-day basis, and want to exploit the opportunities that exist, right, in terms of whether it's international transfers, the use of or reliance on generative AI and other transformative and potentially as transformative solutions in the technology space, all based on data and that data explosion, whilst being cognizant of the risks. What might you say, maybe in a sort of short and sharp summary?
Yeah, so I'm going to paraphrase the Roosevelt famous sentence and say, digitally transform slowly and intentionally and carry a soft click. So I think the first thing is to be intentional about it, right? And that's really key. And also to do a shout out to what you guys do, right? What's the point of standards, right? They're not foolproof. You could be 27001 certified and still have issues that the standard missed. But the whole point of standards and governance in general is that if you have a system, it is much less likely that things will go horribly wrong, right? And so if you are intentional about your data processing, right, that makes it more likely that you are going to be in line with the privacy considerations, right? So I think, one, be intentional, right? About the collection, about the sharing. Don't do unintentional sharing. That's a bunch of lawsuits about, oh, I didn't really even know I had a pixel on my, no, you should not know, right? Be intentional about it. Be intentional about the collection, which is data minimization. Be intentional about the purposes, right? I need it for 1 and 2 and 3, and also 50 other things that I might think about later. That doesn't work anymore because you'll need consent anyway, right? Be transparent about it. Give people, this is sort of the fair information privacy principles, right? The FIPS are here. The FIPS, it's like reincarnation of the FIPS, really. And then the other thing is, I think once you've done that and you devise your strategy that way, you are going to be okay with 80 to 85% of what you need in the state laws. And then, unfortunately, right, you will need, careful counsel in order to navigate the different approaches, because otherwise you could run afoul of the different laws. But the strategy is going to help you, get a good part of the way that will, cover you for most of the laws.
Yeah, no, absolutely fantastic, Odia. That's been hugely fascinating, just listening to your main points there. And I didn't think, as a takeaway, be intentional, be transparent, and seek advice. Know what you have, where it is, and where it's going. I'd nearly bolt onto that as well. And it really, the legal perspectives of the international challenges around digitization are vast, but they're not insurmountable, and there are opportunities there for organizations to realize, not least in standards, but critically, I think the message is governance. Know what you have, where it is, be transparent, and be intentional. Odia, thank you so very much for your participation today, and I'll hand back to David for the final expert panel session. Thanks indeed, Odia.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks, Odia. That was really insightful and really entertaining as well. I said it was. I can't believe I was laughing at some of the such a serious issue here, but you really brought it to life so well. Thank you. And just before we move on, I mean, for me as well, the great point was there are complexities and there is fragmentation around the regulation here, but as you said, the considerations, the basic considerations are the same. And that's a really key point, I think, for everyone as we'll move on to the final session, when we look at then what best practices and pragmatic approaches are. As you said, you can be looking at a core set of these issues here in a common, globally accepted way, and they might not guarantee you're compliant with everything, but it's far easier to see where you are and to actually guide your final bit of compliance based on, focus on best practice around those common consideration. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll come back to you, Odia, for your final takeaway just as we finish the Q&A as well. But we're now going to go on to the third and final session today, when we're going to look at the people perspectives. Now, before we've mentioned around the patient perspective, and that's almost a given here. And what I want to do now is focus on the people factors within the organizations, from the senior leadership team to the wider workforce. And we also want to consider this, really bring it to life before, during, and after a serious cybersecurity event. Now, to this end, I would like to introduce our next guest, Misty. Thank you so much for joining to share your valuable experience and insight around what must have been a really difficult time for you personally. It really shows your commitment to helping others avoid what you and your colleagues went through. Now, from the first discussion today, we've highlighted that the healthcare sector is in a good position, having lagged a little bit, to learn a lot from the pain that other sectors have already been through. And I think your experience is a case in point. And I know it wasn't healthcare, but it was still dealing with very sensitive personal information. What happened to your organization, I think, is very, very relevant. So would you mind just giving us a little bit of background, again, to yourself, your organization, and then really set the scene, really, of what things were like before the event with you as the management team and the wider workforce when it came to cybersecurity, resilience, and this kind of thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for having me. And yes, I am very passionate about sharing as much as I can about my experience. I would not wish for anyone to go through that event. That being said, there's certainly wisdom gained and from having lived through that experience, and you really a greater understanding of all the things you don't think about that you'll have to deal with and address if a full cyber event happens, which we did experience, like a full-blown ransomware event. And so, I think to tell you a little bit about the type of information, it was very sensitive information. It was a SaaS tech company, and so the kind of data that we housed, while it wasn't healthcare, it was still social security numbers, bank account, personal location information. I mean, there was a lot of information that in the wrong hands could be used certainly to hurt individuals. And so to set the stage a little bit, so before the event happened, and I think one of the things that I want to stress is, for those who your job is security and it is protecting the data, you understand the risk and you understand the mitigation approach better than anyone. But the thing is, that individual, right, that department reports to an individual, usually as like a security officer, who sits at a much bigger table, right? So you've got the security officer who is trying to educate people who are not in that part of the business on real risk and the investment it takes to mitigate those risks. And sometimes it can be pretty substantial investments. And at the same time, you've got people sitting at the table whose job is to improve customer experiences and NPS scores and customer service ratings. You've got other people who are there to protect the financial state of the business. You've got people like me who are there my entire job was gaining new business, growing and expanding the current business, and making sure that when we win the new business, we get them fully into our platform and using our platform and committed to that technology. And so we're all sitting at the table, and collectively we make up what is the full picture and the whole health of the organization. And so every month, quarter, and year, when you're sitting and you're looking at the budget and you're looking at what you're going to do with the investment into the business, there's a cost benefit analysis. There is an ROI. Everyone at the table is making a business case for the dollars they want invested, what they wanted invested in, and what the ROI for the organization is. Is it growing revenue? Is it improving customer satisfaction? Is it improving market share? Or is it protecting us? And sometimes that can be a difficult sell, like in our situation. So to set the stage, we had someone, you said in the first session, I thought was so great, like in every great drama story, there's always the scientist that's like touting about impending doom. Like your security officer is doing that. And sometimes it can seem overzealous, but it's real. And somebody has to be the one that's saying it and putting it forward. And so, I think that's just the important thing to understand, is that a lot of the attendees here may be like, this is the world I live in. I'm very well aware of the risk, and they can be frustrated at the lack of buy-in from other people in the organization. So for us, there were several things that we had to consider, and it was using kind of outdated code, outdated technology, but it was a legacy platform. So what would it take to rewrite everything to make it more secure, to be able to leverage the latest and greatest technology for security? But at the time, we were lulled into thinking we were safe because what we had been doing had been working. And there was really no reason to think we couldn't continue to make it work for another 1, 2, 3 years in order to get to the business to a certain place, right? To meet certain objectives.
Right.
So that kind of hopefully sets the stage.
Yeah. So the organization then considers the investment and thinks, if we spend this money here, something bad might not happen. But something bad hasn't happened for the last few years. If we spend it here, something positive is definitely going to happen. So then, quite interesting, this then becomes, it's no longer a cyber or an IT issue or risk. It's a business strategic decision to say, this is what my risk appetite is. And it sounds like, unless as a business you truly understand that risk, you don't know where to set the dial. Because, I mean, as you said, the CISO could say, well, actually, if we're going to do this, we could spend another $1 million on this and another $1 million. And to be honest, if you spend every single cent your organization has in the digital space, there will inevitably be residual risk. So at some point, you've got to say stop. And at that point there, it sounds like your organization were making that decision. This is where we're going to stay. This is our risk appetite, but on the assumption they were suitably secure when they weren't. And then
right,
what about,
absolutely.
Yeah. And what about the rest of the workforce? What was the overall temperature, so to speak, of the workforce, particularly around cyber, but in general as well at that time?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that was one of the things I definitely wanted to touch on, because something that both of the previous speakers have talked about is trust, and how important in healthcare this trust is with the patients, that the patients have with anyone and everyone that has access to their data. But I think the thing that sometimes isn't talked about as much, that was an impact for us, is the trust internally. So what is your culture like? What is the engagement? Do they trust the organization and what's being handed down? I think it was Jerry who said, a lot of times it feels like in the health sector for practitioners that it's happening to them, it's being forced on them, they're being required to use digitization in ways that they don't necessarily see the benefit, and that has an impact. And so personally within our organization, we knew we had culture issues. We knew we had trust issues, but we managed our business like most senior leadership teams do, based against standards. You have what is acceptable turnover rates, what is acceptable growth rates, what's acceptable customer service and customer experience rates. And I think the overall general, while the whole team didn't necessarily agree, those who ultimately had the final say, their thought was, how bad can it be? It's not like they're quitting in droves. It's not like our turnover is really far outside the industry norm, and we were right where we should be. But the thing is, you don't understand the impact of having a less than ideal culture has until you're in a crisis situation. And then you really get to see the good, bad, and ugly of your culture and what's happening. And so as we get into the event and what's happening within the event, and when it happened, it impacted the people you thought that it would, right? So everybody who's got all their plans, you've got the technical things, what the security officer is going to do. They have their resources in place. You know what you're going to do with the IT department and all of the programmers, and they're all going to be head down and high gear for days, weeks, and months. I mean, that was another thing too, is the impact of the event was much longer than we would even anticipated because of the damage that was done.
I'm jump in there because I want to build the suspense a little bit here and do my little bit of creating the story. So, so if I look at things now from a technology perspective, you've got technology, it's been working for a number of years. The workforce, it's okay. It's nothing fantastic, but there's nothing terrible. Everything's working okay. Last question, what about any kind of assessment or testing? What evidence did you have to say, okay, yeah, we're reasonably compliant? I mean, did you have nothing? Did you have something? Was there anything that you could say, okay, we might not be brilliant, we've got this, so we're probably okay?
Yes, that's a great question. So we had done our the ISO compliance and the standards, and so we had done the I'm trying to think of the name of the
Just what, a SOC report or something like that? Is that there's SOC,
yeah, the SOC,
ISO,
thank you, the
SOC.
SOC report. So the SOC, there's SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3.
Yeah.
And in the US, you know, for what we were doing, a SOC 1 was kind of the bare minimum. Ideally, you want a SOC 2, but we had a SOC 1, and we were able to provide documentation that we were going into the SOC 2 process, which was really for a lot of your winning new business, as long as you could provide that, they felt safe. So you're doing what, so back to your point, when you're sitting around the table and saying, okay, if we're going to invest, what are we going to invest in? Okay, well, we know we're going to be asked for SOC reports. We know we're going to be asked for certain things. So that we're going to do because the ROI is tangible. It's going to help us win business, especially bigger business.
Yeah. So again, this is not, we do this because something bad might happen, is we do this because it'll help us win a bid. So that's an interesting point, and maybe that's something we'll come on to in the next session, the positive benefits of going for certification. But as you said, what you actually had was effectively the bare minimum. But as an organization, as a management, you're reasonably okay. You're thinking, you know, we've been okay for a number of years. We know what we're doing. We've got the basics. Our team are okay. Then bam, the event happens.
Yes. So
what was that experience like for you as a senior team and then the rest of the workforce?
So to help build the suspense, I want to add one more piece of information. So the senior team, so we made assumptions, right?
Early. Yeah.
You did. So to add one more thing is I think this happens within organizations. We made assumptions. We made assumptions that if you worked within the department where you were a programmer or you were within security, which means you had the highest level of access within the technology, passwords, things like that, right? User IDs and passwords. That you, as a result of having that title and being in that department, were well trained and versed on how to pinpoint phishing scams, how to detect when someone was trying to get into your system. David, you said it best early on when we met, which was your people can either be your greatest weakness, so it can be one of the weakest links in the chain, or they can be your strongest defense. But it really is up to the organization on which one they were. Well, we made assumptions that ended up being detrimental, which was if you had certain levels of access, you already knew that. So we were not doing the training that we should have been doing because we made assumptions that weren't right and they weren't good for the organization. So now,
a bit
bam,
like with the assumptions around the risk. Right, it's that assumption that's really, really critical. The assumptions around the risk and the assumptions around the competencies. Okay, now do the big bang, bam, the event happens.
Here we are.
Yeah. What was that
cyber
like
event
for the
happens.
management team? Yeah, and for the rest of the workforce.
I think to make a quick summary, because I know we have a limited time, it was catastrophic chaos. That's what it was. And it impacted every part of the organization in very different ways. And outside of the IT department, where you know they're going to be impacted, they're the ones that had to go in and fix it. They're the one that has to go in and repair the code. And you know, like every organization, we were doing as much as we could with as few people as possible. But now it's all hands on deck. They are working 24/7, and I mean that literally. They had cots beside their desk. They were sleeping in the office, right? Because it was a do or die, save this organization from the outcome of the ransomware event, right? And that had a significant impact on burnout. And we lost key players because of burnout, not because they didn't love what they do, they weren't loyal to the organization. They just got to the point where they were like, I've done all I can do. I really physically, mentally, and emotionally cannot do this anymore. So that's an impact that sometimes you can almost predict. What we didn't predict was the impact on the market. We knew that it would tarnish. We didn't realize the level of significant impact it would have externally in the market. We didn't realize the impact it would have on every part of the organization. So, you know, all of a sudden your customer service team, who's supposed to be upselling and cross-selling and creating an incredible client experience, is being bombarded with angry, frustrated customers and clients. So they're being worn thin. everybody in the leadership team had to jump in there. We all were filtering calls and being, there to talk our clients through what was happening. But the finance department was hit. The sales team, I mean, at this point, the sales team, they can't do anything. And remember, we talked about culture. So now you have operations teams, finance teams, and different people in different organizations where they were already frustrated with the company. They already had some trust issues and just some overall issues with the culture and just the organization. Well, that really showed itself when it was who was going to step up and what can I do? Anything. I'll do anything that the organization needs. I'll be the janitor if that's what it needs. I want to overcome this to Inuit, or if I can't do the job I was hired to do, why do I have to come in the office every day? Why do I need to be here? And I'm just sitting here twiddling my thumbs, watching this disaster unfold. And so the energy, right, was either I'm all in or completely negative. And so I think it'd be easy to think that there are just some departments that will go untouched, and that's just not true. And something else we didn't think about, so we talk about with the standards and all the things you put in place, all the planning, right? All the mapping. What do we do if this happens? Who do we call? What do we lock down? But what you don't plan for is the PR you'll need externally. There's mandated what you have to report to those directly impacted, but what are you going to say to everybody else? There were so many things that we didn't think about. And the problem is you don't have a lot of time to think about it. Once you're in it, that's what I mean by catastrophic chaos. It is absolute chaos. You have things coming from you at so many different directions. And then months later, David, 9 months later, you still have people externally in the market wanting to know more or saying, I want to do business with you. I would love to do business with you. If you're still here in 9 more months, I'll think about it. So there are just so many impacts that organizations usually are not prepared for, because there's nothing in the standards that say, hey, by the way, you need to be prepared in these areas if an event were to happen, because you don't know.
That's a really good point. And certainly when we're looking at best practice and standards, it's one thing to have a process, but it's something else to try and improve it. There's again, with my military background, there's a famous saying, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. The minute it comes live, that's when you find out what really happens. And this is where you need a motivated, engaged workforce as well. So I think that's a really, really important point. So if you're going to summarize some key learning points for the healthcare sector based on what you've been through, what would you say from your side were the really key issues to take on board?
Absolutely. So the first thing is having access to and implementing standards is the bare minimum. You have to be doing that. If you're not doing that, you're falling below the bar. So, but recognize that just making sure that you're getting the certifications and that you are administering against standards is the bare minimum. So there's bare minimum and best in class, and every organization based on real budget and investment and strategy have to figure out where they're going to be. But I'm going to tell you, as someone who's had to go through this, the bare minimum is not enough. It's not. You're probably not going to be best in class on everything, but you really do need to make sure that you understand that if you don't have the standards and you're not getting certified and you're below the line, and I would be concerned for you. If you're doing the bare minimums and you think it's enough and you think nobody can touch you, you're probably being lulled into a safety net that you don't really have. The next thing I would say is your people are your absolute best defense. They are your best defense. Don't make assumptions, and invest in training them on cybersecurity. How do they participate in helping to keep an organization safe? Because we all play a role in that, because we have access to digital things through our computer, right? So somebody's just trying to get in through somebody's computer in some way. So we do all play a pivotal role, no matter what department you're in the overall security of an organization. So don't make assumptions based on titles or roles, and have everyone be trained, and have that be, have your workforce be, your absolute best armor, because they can be. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then the third thing is, when you're sitting around the table, just when you're the security staff and you're in the security department and you don't understand why an organization isn't doing certain things, just know that there's a bigger conversation, and just ask how you can support your leaders. How can you help them? How can you have conversations to help them to understand the real risk and the real impact of those risks? Because David, like you said, most people are protecting against something they've never experienced. And they're like, I think Jerry said, like, ransomware attacks and cyber events have doubled. Well, most people have heard about it, but you don't meet a lot of people who've lived through it. So it can be easy to think that it's not really that big of a threat.
Yeah, I mean, Missy, this is so valuable. It really, nothing brings it to life than someone who's been through it and telling it with passion and with that conviction in their eyes. That's really, really powerful. And you mentioned, we do say a lot that we want to change that dogma in cyber world from people are the weakest link to people are your biggest weapon. And that positive culture and that positive engagement is so, so critical for building resilience. Technical controls can build a wall. Technical controls can identify particular anomalies. But when it comes to things really hitting the fan, it's people that will save you. It's people that can stop it, and it's people that will save you and people that will get you out of it. That's so, so powerful. Thank you so much. We're going to come back to you for a final point, and we're just going to go through some Q&A. I almost need to take a bit of breath myself now. That was just really, really extremely powerful. So we have had some questions in. If you've got any more questions, do fire them in right now. We're just about to do some Q&A. So much we've covered in that 1 hour here. So I'm just going to pick a couple of the questions out before we get into a summary and go back around the team for one last point. So we've got one very interesting question here, really talking about additional data protection, cybersecurity, and technical measures will be necessary as we move to the use of virtual wards. And this is something I've been talking about today at the conference here, actually, exactly that around virtual wards. And data is going to be transmitted via household or public networks. How is this going to be controlled? And this is a really good point. And this was a hot topic at the conference right here today. We are looking at this. There are ways of applying appropriate levels of protection to data in those environments. There are, and this is really about being proportionate. And there's questions here about regulation or this kind of thing then as well. I don't necessarily see the need for massive more regulation in this place, because there's plenty of guidance and the regulation's pretty much already covering it anyway. What I do see is the need for pragmatic collaboration between those who are providing those endpoint technologies and those key stakeholder groups. But there are standards out there, there's best practice out there right now today that can make this happen effectively, but it will only happen effectively if all those stakeholder groups get together and address this. And certainly this is something I can tell you that BSI are focusing on right here and now. This whole idea of the virtual ward and a hospital at home is a very, very hot topic, and we're convening that ecosystem right now to address that very, very question. So great question, and I don't see it being a major technical issue, or being necessarily a regulation issue. This is going to come down to pragmatic collaboration between the stakeholders to make it happen. Connor, I don't know if you've got any views on that as well, but
yeah.
The integration of elements of consumer technology alongside formal medical technology, if we can crack that effectively, that actually opens up digital healthcare to be far more inclusive, far more cost effective, and covering much wider society. So it's a huge, huge focus.
No, without a doubt, and we're seeing this with a lot of our clients at the moment, David. And on the consulting advisory side, we're helping clients in the healthcare and the health sector to navigate the complexities of exactly this, right? Virtual wards and remote clinical sort of offices and remote treatment solutions, and the digital doctor's office, or as you said, the hospital at home, and the proliferation of consumer technology means that people have very powerful devices in their back pockets and in the palm of their hands to enable this type of service, which is completely different from the traditional view of a clinician's office in the past. And that's fantastic. And just picking up on something Jerry had mentioned earlier about the healthcare sector being the laggard, right? You know, it is being pulled and dragged into the 21st century by the very nature of people like you and I, the patients, demanding this type of service from our clinicians. And so, yes, we're already seeing this. And just on the regulatory compliance element of that question, Odia mentioned it earlier, knowing what you have, where it's going. And it's actually a supply chain issue. It comes down to what visibility you have as a service provider. Yes, it might be a clinical service provider, but what visibility you have into the digital or information supply chain on which your service delivery now depends. And that might very well be household networks, public networks, third-party infrastructure, and third-party service providers in terms of the applications, the diagnostic equipment, the transmission protocols, and obviously the security obligations of all of that still rest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can, other organizations, your third-party supply chain might be responsible, but you're still accountable. That's the key thing here. And so understanding that and all of that is absolutely key. You know, but I'm confident that the standards are there, the technologies are there to make this work effectively. It's just around the governance, the overall governance of that overall ecosystem, to make sure it's done properly. Jerry, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that as well.
Yeah, quick technical reminders to everyone from a security perspective. You always want your data to be encrypted both at rest and in transit, right? That's always really important to remember. A lot of people understand that it should be encrypted in transit. Sometimes we forget about it being encrypted at rest. When you download something, the file then could be transmitted securely, but it's on your laptop, may not be encrypted. Also, if you're using public networks, right? It's always a good idea to use a VPN or some sort of service that encrypts. And if you don't have access to a work VPN or you don't have one, there are options out there that are cheap and available for a personal VPN. So just a couple neighborhood reminders from the technology perspective.
Yeah, and I just want to take that point one further. I mean, within our test labs in looking at the wider IoT market, when we test consumer products for IoT, smart products, certainly a couple of years ago, we had probably a 0% initial pass rate. Every product coming in was failing. And now we're starting to see better technology coming in. So I don't see that it will just be open doors to say, well, we can use any technology here. I can see at the other side, though, to say that every single device we're going to use in that ecosystem has to be a formally certified medical device also isn't viable. But I do see there are a set of general global standards and best practice that can be deployed on consumer technology without the need necessary for full qualification of a medical device that will enable this ecosystem to happen. But I think that's probably a separate discussion on its own. We'll maybe touch on that next time. The next question I've got in actually just relates back to something Connor and Odia were talking about around the EU-US agreement. Odia, I don't know if it's best for you or Connor just to pick up on that. So this recent agreement now, then I gather there's now an adequacy decision in the new framework. What does that mean in real terms? How does that actually help right now in terms of health data? And does this mean then the old SHIELD program is now back valid again? We haven't got too much time, but just a quick word on that maybe.
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one, Odia. I had to drop for an urgent client matter, but in essence, it just actually recertifies and sort of reinvigorates the concept of international data transfers, and it means that data, personal data, obviously, can be transferred from the EU to the US, as long as it's being transferred to a self-certified organization that's signed up to the new DPF. Is the old Privacy Shield that you alluded to, David, that is dead in the water, does not exist anymore. Some might argue this is just the pig with different lipstick. And as it happens, I have just seen, because privacy never stops, much like security never stops, I've just seen some breaking news out of France that apparently, unconfirmed, an MP in the French Parliament has just raised issue with the adequacy agreement. So perhaps somebody's stealing Max Schrems's thunder. Maybe we don't have Schrems 3, but it might seem to be a Philippe Latrobe 1, or un, as they might say in France. Exactly. So but right now it is in force, and it is a lawful mechanism by which European controllers can transfer data to the US.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. One final point that's come in has really been asking again around the standards, best practice, and this kind of thing. When are we going to get beyond just talking about it? Well, that's actually going to be at the heart of the next session, when what we feel is here. In the first session, we really gave that opening background around the benefits and challenges. What I hope we've shared with you today is some real insight into 3 key domains. And I think what we can see, issues around culture and holistic approach, security by design, all these major themes, they all are covered by global best practice. And what we're going to start to do, I think, on the next session, the final session, is to really nail this down and to give you all really some guidance on the next steps forward. So bearing in mind the time, we're going to have to call a day on the questions here. And I just want to go back firstly to Jerry and then to Misty to ask you once again, if you've got one piece of final advice for the audience, what would that be? Over to you, Jerry, first.
Yeah, I'll reiterate what Connor said. I think we all need to remember that in the healthcare ecosystem, we're patients first, right? We're all patients. So we need to leverage our abilities within the system to demand more of the system, right? And participate actively in the evolution from a technology perspective and a security perspective. And I think what you'll find is that healthcare is more and more receptive to that. They are more aware of the fact that the system being consumer-centric is a good thing, evolves healthcare, and makes for better clinical outcomes. So I also just want to say thanks to everyone for attending, and thanks to BSI and David and Connor for inviting me to participate.
Well, thank you, Jerry. No, that's great. Patient centricity, absolutely. And Misty, now over to you again. One final thought for the audience.
Yeah, just to build off what Jerry's saying is that while we all are patients first and we understand that perspective, the next level is internally. So it's with all of those that are being required to, as practitioners, use the systems, use the data. How do you build trust within your organization and help them see the benefit and the ROI to digitization, but also help them to understand how they play a role in protecting all of that data, and that they understand their role in that in every layer of healthcare, right? From the practitioners to the admin and officers and so on and so forth. And, you know, David, I think you said it best. It's at the end of the day, it is people behind organizations that make organizations run. It is the people that are there when things are good, but it's also those same people that are going to be there if you run into some kind of catastrophic event. And so you said that beautifully.
Thank you, Misty. That's a great way, really, I think, for us to end there, really putting people at the heart. And that's something that really resonates with BSI. So at this point, I want to hand back over to Christy, really, to just round up and set us up for the final session. So Christy, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our esteemed panelists. It was just brilliant to listen to your experiences. And just to kind of recap again, we started out in the first class with opportunities and challenges, and we were talking to clinician and getting the clinician and patient. And then to be able to bring somebody from that technology, someone who is innovating digital technologies in the healthcare sector, to talk about the challenges of leveraging data to do something meaningful for the greater good, but also what does that mean when you are innovating and you create a product that essentially can have patient health information? What does that mean to you, and how are you addressing that? And it's wonderful to know that we've got great innovators in the space who are very cognizant of privacy and security and design, and then moving into understanding the legal complexity and how to navigate that, and that it is getting more complex, but we're working towards understanding that, all the way to Missy having shared that experience and just understand. We know the published data, it costs X amount of money to those impacted, and the fines that are paid, but to really understand the burden that people carry when an event happens on their watch. And they understand the impact of what's just happened and the toll that takes on your mental health. To be part of an organization that's then trying to recover from that and save face from that, it's huge. So, you know, investing in that kind of protection isn't just about saving your brand. It's about taking care of your people and keeping them from having to go through that experience. So it's just been brilliant to hear that. And I'm really looking forward, because what we want to try to do in this next session is talk about how do we figure out where we are in our organization? What stage are we at? Are we considering this in the design and usability and human factors? And how are we incorporating and growing with that? How are we perceiving cybersecurity? How are we perceiving the dark web and how they innovate versus your innovation? You know, can you afford to lag in innovation when your threats are innovating rapidly? And so we're going to look at frameworks and how you can assess where your business is at. And as Misty and David discussed, that dial, right? Because you can have the most secure platform, but if you don't have functionality, then it doesn't make it to market either. So it's a fine balance to creating something that's really usable and impactful, but also safe and effective. So really excited to take that forward. And as you can see, that last class will be October 12th, and we look forward to having you continue this journey and attend that third session. And again, thank you so much for your time and attention. This will be recorded and available in the library very soon. So thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.